Welcome to these gentle, soothing stories for sleep. I'm so glad you are here. Whether you are preparing to drift off to sleep, relaxing after a long day, or simply seeking a quiet companion, you have come to the right place. Tonight, we will embark on a journey of the mind, a thought experiment that is both wondrous and deeply chilling. As we explore the question, what would happen if the sun disappeared for one day? Before we begin, I'd love to know where you are listening from tonight, or how your day was. Please leave a comment below. Wherever you are, I hope you are feeling comfortable, relaxed, and ready to explore something gentle yet extraordinary. And if you find these soothing scientific journeys interesting, pleasant, or even just wonderfully weird, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more souls who are searching for peace find their way here. Imagine the softest whisper of warmth on your skin just before you open your eyes, a gentle insistence that the night is over and a new day is waiting. It is a feeling so common, so deeply woven into the fabric of our lives, that we rarely pause to truly consider it. This is the first touch of the sunrise, a quiet promise kept by our star across an impossible distance. Think of the last time you truly watched it happen, perhaps over the still surface of a lake, or from a window looking out over a sleeping city. The world begins in shades of bruised purple and deep indigo, a quiet, cool stillness holding its breath. Then, a single, impossibly thin line of pale rose appears at the edge of the world, a fragile crack in the darkness. Slowly, that line thickens, bleeding its color upwards into the heavens, melting the darkness into hues of orange and soft gold. The air itself begins to change, losing its nocturnal chill and taking on a palpable warmth, a texture you can feel on your face and your hands. The birds begin their chorus, a symphony of awakening that follows the light across the globe, and through the glass of your window, you might see the first direct rays of sunlight painting golden shafts through the air, illuminating the tiny, dancing universe of dust motes. This is the grand, silent rhythm of our planet, a collective, unspoken turning of the world's face toward the light, a gentle and reliable awakening we have trusted for the entirety of our existence. This warmth, this life-giving light, originates from a process of unimaginable power, taking place 150 million kilometers away. Our sun is not a fire in any way we would understand it on Earth, not a thing that is burning through fuel like a log in a fireplace. It is, instead, a colossal nuclear furnace, a sphere of incandescent gas, so massive that its own gravity creates pressures and temperatures in its core that defy earthly comparison. Deep in that heart of the sun, the temperature reaches around 15 million degrees Celsius, and the pressure is immense, crushing everything with an unimaginable weight. In this crucible, the most common element in the universe, hydrogen, is put under such duress that its atoms are forced to overcome their natural repulsion. They slam together and fuse, creating a new, heavier element, helium. This act of transformation, this process of thermonuclear fusion, is not perfectly efficient, for a tiny fraction of the mass of the hydrogen atoms is not needed to create the helium, and this leftover mass is converted directly into a staggering amount of pure energy, exploding outwards in the form of gamma rays and particles of light called photons. This is the engine of our world, a constant, stable, and self-regulating nuclear reaction that has been burning for more than 4.5 billion years, and it is the source of every ray of light that has ever touched the Earth. The journey of that light, however, is far stranger and longer than one might imagine. A single photon of light created in the furnace of the sun's core does not travel in a straight line to the surface. It is born into an environment of plasma, so dense that it is like trying to walk through a crowd of infinite size. The photon travels only a tiny distance before it is absorbed by an atom, held for a moment, and then re-emitted in a completely random new direction. It zigs and zags, ricochets and bounces, moving up, down, and sideways in what physicists call a random walk. This journey from the core to the surface, a distance of nearly 700,000 kilometers, can take a staggering amount of time, often estimated to be tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of years. The light that warms your face this morning, The very photons that allow your eyes to see these words are ancient, born long before human civilization ever began. They have wandered through the dense interior of our star for an eternity, and only in the very last moments of their long existence do they finally break free from the surface and begin their final, unimpeded journey across the vacuum of space. That last leg of the journey is, by contrast, incredibly fast. Light is the fastest thing in the universe, traveling at a constant speed of 299,792,458 meters per second. But even at this incredible velocity, the vastness of space means the journey is not instantaneous. From the moment a photon leaves the surface of the sun to the moment it arrives at Earth, a period of roughly 8 minutes and 20 seconds must pass. We live our lives under this silent covenant with a star, a profound and unspoken trust that its light will always be there, that its return each morning is a celestial guarantee. We schedule our meetings, our meals, our hopes, and our very biology around this cosmic clockwork, a clockwork so reliable that we have almost forgotten to be in awe of it. It is the most fundamental relationship in our existence, the steady pulse of a distant star that dictates the rhythm of our lives, and we rarely contemplate the profound fragility of that beautiful, life-giving guarantee. We exist in a constant stream of this ancient light, a river of energy that has traveled for millennia just to reach us. But what would it feel like? What would it mean if in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, that stream simply stopped? It happens not with a bang, but with an unnoticed absence, a cosmic event of unimaginable significance that has already occurred 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago. We are, for this brief window of time, living in a memory, bathed in the light and warmth of a star that is no longer there. Picture a bustling city park at midday, the sun high and seemingly permanent in a brilliant blue sky. Children are laughing on the swings, their faces tilted up into the warmth. Office workers are sitting on benches, eating their lunches, the gentle heat soaking into their shoulders. The world is a symphony of the mundane, a portrait of life proceeding with absolute normalcy, completely and blissfully unaware that its source of power has been cut. The last photons of that ancient light are completing their 150 million kilometer journey, the final whisper of a star's presence. And as they fall upon the Earth, they paint a world that is already an artifact, a ghost. We are living in an echo of light, held in the embrace of a star that has, for all intents and purposes, already vanished from the universe. This strange delay applies not only to light, but to the very force that holds our world in its place. For centuries, we imagined gravity as an instantaneous, invisible string tying the planets to the sun. But one of the most profound insights from Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity is that gravity is not instantaneous. It is a curvature in the fabric of space-time itself, caused by a massive object like the sun, and ripples in this fabric, or gravitational waves, propagate outwards at the same finite speed as light. So for those 8 minutes and 20 seconds after the sun has disappeared, the Earth continues its graceful arc through space, perfectly following the curve in space-time, created by a star that no longer occupies that position. We are held in orbit by the ghost of a gravitational field, a lingering memory in the shape of space, faithfully circling an empty point in the cosmos. We feel its familiar pull, we follow its reliable path, utterly oblivious to the fact that the tether has been cut, and we are moments away from being cast adrift. And then, the last photon arrives. The change is not like dusk, nor is it like a storm cloud covering the sun. It is absolute. In one instant, the bright blue sky does not fade to black. It snaps to it. The light switch of the solar system is flipped off, and the source of all illumination is gone. The sky would become a perfect, depthless, and shocking black, the kind of black you can only find in the deepest of caves. And in that blackness, the stars would appear, not as the faint pinpricks we see through our hazy, light-polluted atmosphere, but as a brilliant, terrifyingly clear carpet of icy diamonds. The Milky Way, usually a subtle smudge for only the keenest-eyed observers, would slash across the sky in its full, textured glory. But the familiar points of light would be gone. The moon, which shines only by reflecting sunlight, would vanish completely, leaving only a dark, invisible sphere in the sky. Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, all the planets would be extinguished, as their light is not their own. The human brain, a product of millions of years of predictable sunrises and sunsets, is simply not wired for such an event. The first reaction on the ground, for every single person looking up, would not be panic, but a profound and silent confusion, a sense of deep cognitive dissonance as the eyes report a reality that the mind refuses to accept. People would look up expecting to see clouds, but would find only the cold, clear, and impossible vision of deep space at what should be midday. In that singular moment, all of humanity, across all 7 continents, would be united by a single, silent question whispered in thousands of different languages. What just happened? Every assumption we have ever held about the nature of reality, about the unbreakable laws of day and night, would be utterly shattered. We are creatures of the sun, our moods, our biology, our entire history, shaped by its reliable presence. Its sudden and inexplicable absence would feel like a profound betrayal by the universe itself, a tearing of the very fabric of the known world. We are children of the light, and our parent has just disappeared from sight, leaving us alone in a vast and sudden darkness. The light is gone. The warmth, however, lingers for a moment, like the residual heat from a bonfire that has just been extinguished, a fading memory on the skin of the world. But how long can a planet, now alone in the cold of space, hold on to the memory of its star's embrace? Have you ever been in a cave so deep within the earth that when the guide turns off the lights, the darkness feels solid? It is a blackness so complete that it seems to press against your eyelids, a palpable void where the sense of sight, our most trusted guide, is not just hindered, but entirely abolished. This is the darkness that now claims the world. It is not the gentle, moonlit dark of a familiar night, softened by the silver glow of a celestial neighbour and the distant shimmer of city lights. This is a profound, inky blackness, a cosmic absolute punctuated only by the distant, cold light of the stars, which offer no illumination to the world beneath, serving only as a reminder of the vast and empty space into which we are falling. The world, once a landscape of familiar shapes and colours, becomes an alien territory defined only by touch and sound. In this new reality, our other senses, long subordinate to our vision, would rise in a desperate attempt to map the world. Sounds are amplified. The whisper of the wind through the trees or the rustle of your own clothing becomes unnervingly loud. The air feels colder on the skin, and the ground beneath your feet becomes an unknown landscape of texture and incline. People everywhere stumble, their hands outstretched, utterly disoriented in their own homes and streets. The stars, once a source of romantic wonder and ancient navigation, now seem like indifferent, icy diamonds, watching a world that has lost its way. Our bodies would immediately try to fight this tyranny of the dark. The pupils of our eyes, the apertures that control how much light reaches the sensitive retina at the back, would dilate to their maximum physical limit, opening to about 8 millimeters in a desperate attempt to gather every available photon. Within the retina itself, a miraculous biological shift would occur, a process known as dark adaptation. Our eyes contain 2 types of light-detecting cells. The cones, which are clustered in the center of our vision and are responsible for perceiving fine detail and the rich spectrum of color, but they require bright light to function, and the rods, which populate the periphery of our vision, cannot see in color, but are extraordinarily sensitive to even the faintest glimmer of light. In the sudden blackness, our cones would be useless, and our retinal chemistry would begin to shift, increasing the sensitivity of the rods by a factor of thousands. This process is slow, taking a full 30 minutes to reach its peak, but even at their most sensitive, our rods would be overwhelmed by the sheer lack of light. They would be able to detect the faint glow of the Milky Way, allowing us to see the sky in ghostly monochrome detail, but the world at our feet would remain a treacherous and invisible landscape. While our own biology struggles, a far more fundamental biological process across the entire planet would have already ceased. For every plant, from the tallest redwood in California to the smallest, most insignificant phytoplankton drifting in the sunlit zone of the ocean, photosynthesis would have stopped instantly. This is the foundational miracle of our biosphere, the elegant chemical process where plants use the energy from sunlight to transform simple molecules of water and carbon dioxide into glucose, the sugar that provides energy for their own growth. And as a wondrous byproduct, they release the oxygen that we breathe. The moment the sun vanishes, this planetary engine of energy production and atmospheric replenishment sputters and dies. For the duration of a single day, this would not be catastrophic for our oxygen supply, as the atmosphere holds a vast reserve. But it is a silent, systemic shock that travels immediately up the entire food web, a sudden and absolute famine for the producers that form the base of all life on Earth. And as for humanity, our immediate, instinctual response would be to create our own light. All across the world, in the span of a few moments, every light switch would be flipped, every emergency system activated. This unprecedented, simultaneous demand for power, the global surge on a system designed for predictable, cyclical loads, would be its death sentence. Power grids, without the input from solar farms and under stresses they were never built to handle, would experience cascading failures. Transformers would blow with muffled thuds, substations would trip their breakers, and within an hour, most of the world's artificial lights would be extinguished, plunging our civilization back into that same primal, star-dusted dark. We have built our civilizations to defy the night, constructing vast and glittering cities that burn with our own electric suns. We have lined our streets with light and filled our homes with a glow that holds the darkness at bay. And in doing so, we have forgotten that this is a fragile illusion, a thin veneer of control over a world that is still subject to cosmic laws. In the face of a true, planetary night, our most advanced technologies would flicker and die, their failures serving as a stark reminder of how fundamentally we are still creatures of the dawn, utterly and completely dependent on a light we do not command and cannot control. With our sight stolen and our artificial lights failing, another, more subtle change begins to creep across the surface of the Earth. A deep and penetrating cold. Feel the air around you right now, in this quiet moment. It holds a warmth that seems constant, a gentle property of the world we inhabit. It is a gift given to us by our sun, an inheritance of energy that has crossed 150 million kilometers of empty space to make our world not just habitable, but comfortable. What happens when that gift is no longer given? The very first thing you would notice is the chill. It is not the familiar cold of a winter's day, which often arrives with wind and moisture, but a strange, uncanny, and penetrating cold that seems to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It is the feeling of heat being actively pulled away from you, radiating out into the infinite void. The ground beneath your feet, which an hour ago was filled with the stored warmth of the midday sun, begins to feel cool, then cold to the touch. Surfaces that absorb and radiate heat most effectively, things like dark asphalt roads and metal railings, are the first to become icy, their latent warmth bleeding away into the darkness with astonishing speed. The air itself, which was once a turbulent medium of rising warm currents and sinking cool ones, grows heavy and still. It is as if the planet itself is taking a long, slow, cold exhalation, breathing out the last of its vital warmth into the unforgiving vacuum of space. This process is governed by a simple but relentless law of physics. Our Earth maintains its comfortable average temperature through a delicate and continuous balancing act. During the day, it absorbs a tremendous amount of energy from the sun in the form of visible and ultraviolet light. At the same time, the Earth is constantly radiating energy back out into space in the form of invisible infrared radiation, which we can feel as heat. Life thrives within the equilibrium of this energy budget, the balance between the income of solar radiation and the expenditure of terrestrial heat. The moment the sun disappears, the income stops, but the expenditure continues. The planet is now a closed system with a constant leak, its thermal savings account draining away with every passing second. The Earth is now losing heat without any way to replace it, and the relentless mathematics of thermodynamics have taken control. Different materials, however, will surrender their warmth at different rates, a property known as thermal inertia. Think of it as a kind of thermal stubbornness. the resistance of a substance to changing its temperature. Land, especially dry, rocky areas like deserts or paved cities, has a relatively low thermal inertia. It heats up quickly in the sun, and it cools down just as fast. Within the first few hours of the Great Darkness, temperatures in these regions would plummet dramatically, quickly falling below freezing and continuing their steep descent. Water, on the other hand, is one of the most thermally stubborn substances in the universe. It has an incredibly high thermal inertia. The vast oceans, the Great Lakes, and the winding rivers will hold onto their stored heat for much, much longer. It takes a great deal of energy to warm water, and it must lose a great deal of energy to cool it. The oceans, in this scenario, become the planet's thermal batteries, vast reservoirs of warmth that will resist the encroaching cold far more effectively than the continents they surround. Our planet does have one more layer of protection. The atmosphere, our air, and particularly the greenhouse gases within it, like water vapor and carbon dioxide, acts like a transparent blanket, trapping a portion of the heat that radiates from the surface and preventing it from escaping directly into space. A region with a thick blanket of clouds and humid air would cool more slowly than a clear, dry desert under the stars. But this atmospheric blanket can only slow the loss. It cannot stop it. The Earth is bleeding warmth through its atmospheric shroud, a steady and unstoppable exhalation into the infinite cold. We think of warmth as a given, a fundamental property of our world, the stage upon which our lives are set. But it is not. It is a constant, active process, a gift that is renewed every moment of every day by the distant, thermonuclear heartbeat of our star. This sudden and universal cold reveals a profound truth about our home. Our planet is not inherently a gentle cradle of life. It is a rock in the void, a cosmic object whose surface is made habitable only by a continuous and fragile thread of energy, a river of light and heat flowing across the vacuum. As the land grows cold under this new and terrifying law, the creatures that live upon it, so perfectly attuned to the ancient rhythm of day and night, are thrown into a state of deep and primal confusion. Can you hear it? In the sudden, deepening dark and the encroaching, penetrating cold, a new sound begins to rise across the globe, a sound that is not carried on the wind, but is instead composed of a million individual cries of distress. It is the sound of profound biological confusion, the collective voice of the animal kingdom, as it finds its most fundamental rules of existence have been broken. The world's diurnal creatures, those beings who have evolved to live their lives in the light of the sun, are plunged into a state of absolute shock. The birds, caught mid-flight, would find their primary navigational cues have vanished. Their instinct would scream at them to find shelter for a night that has arrived without a dusk, and many would become hopelessly disoriented, their flocks scattering in the blackness. Great herds of grazing animals on the plains of Africa or the grasslands of North America would stand frozen in place, their senses telling them of a darkness deeper than any they have known, their internal rhythms screaming that this is not the proper time for sleep or predators. Meanwhile, the world's nocturnal hunters, the owls and the cats, the bats and the raccoons, would emerge from their burrows and their dens, their ancient biological clocks telling them that their time has come, only to find a world that is far colder and stranger than any night they have ever been built to endure. The planet's ancient and beautiful symphony of life, the gentle transition from the day shift to the night shift, becomes a jarring and terrifying cacophony of distress. This widespread chaos is rooted in a biological principle that is as deep as life itself. Nearly every living organism on this planet, from the most complex mammal to the simplest fungus, operates on an internal, roughly 24-hour cycle, known as a circadian rhythm. This is our biological clock, an intricate and ancient piece of molecular machinery within our very cells that governs everything from our sleep-wake cycles to our metabolism and hormone production. This internal clock is not perfect. It needs to be synchronized each day with the external world, and its primary cue, the master conductor for this orchestra of life, is the light-dark cycle of the sun. When that cycle is not just altered but completely shattered, it throws the internal chemistry of every living being into disarray. Hormones like melatonin, which signals the body to prepare for sleep, and cortisol, which manages stress and alertness, would be released at entirely the wrong times, causing widespread physiological stress and confusion that transcends mere behavior. And for many animals, the consequences are even more immediate and direct, as their senses are tuned to aspects of the sun we can barely perceive. A honeybee, for example, navigates its world not just by the sun's position, but by reading the pattern of polarized light in the blue sky, an invisible compass that allows it to find its way back to the hive with pinpoint accuracy. Without the sun, this compass is gone, and any bee caught away from its hive is irrevocably lost. Migrating birds, which use the sun's position as a crucial tool for their incredible transcontinental journeys, would find their celestial maps have been rendered useless. And for the world's cold-blooded, or ectothermic, creatures like reptiles and amphibians, the situation is even more dire. They do not generate their own body heat, and they rely directly on the external warmth of the sun to regulate their body temperature and power their movements. As the world cools around them with an unnatural speed, their bodies would cool with it, their movements becoming sluggish, their muscles ceasing to function, until they are left immobile and helpless in the face of the encroaching freeze. The very foundation of the marine food web would also crumble. In the upper layers of the ocean, countless trillions of microscopic plants called phytoplankton, which produce more than half of the world's oxygen, would cease their photosynthesis. This silent and invisible event would send an immediate shockwave up the entire food chain, starving the tiny zooplankton that graze upon them, which in turn starves the small fish, which starves the larger predators, all the way up to the great whales. We often view ourselves as a species separate from the natural world, cocooned within our technology and our intellect. But this event would serve as a profound and humbling reminder of our shared biological heritage. The same ancient clock that tells a flower when to open its petals in the morning is the very same clock that ticks within our own cells, telling us when to feel sleepy or when to feel awake. The sun is not just a bright feature of our environment, it is the grand conductor of the entire orchestra of life, the silent metronome that gives rhythm to every creature on Earth. And without its steady guiding baton, the music of the world descends into a terrifying and chaotic noise. While the animal kingdom struggles with this instinctual fear, humanity grapples with a different, more complex, and perhaps more fragile terror: the sudden and catastrophic collapse of the very systems that define our civilization. What is a city but a promise? It is a promise of light in the darkness, a promise of order over chaos, a promise of connection across distance. It is a web of intricate agreements and systems, all designed to hold the wildness of the world at bay. What happens then, when all of those promises are broken at once, not by war or disaster, but by a simple, impossible change in the sky? The world is now completely dark, for the power grids that held the night at bay have failed under the strain. The initial silence of the blackout is soon broken by a rising tide of sirens as emergency services attempt to respond to a crisis that has no precedent and no solution. But even these sirens soon begin to fade, one by one, as traffic grinds to a halt in an impassable, unlit gridlock of abandoned cars. The most powerful tool of our modern age, our network of instantaneous communication, has dissolved into static. There are no phones, no internet, no television or radio broadcasts to explain what is happening. People are trapped and isolated in their homes, their workplaces, their vehicles, each person alone with their own growing fear. The initial shock of the event gives way to a creeping, profound anxiety as a new reality sets in. No one is coming to help, because everyone is in the same predicament. The very structures of authority that we rely upon, our governments, our police forces, our emergency responders, are as blind, as isolated, and as powerless as everyone else. The catastrophic speed of this collapse is due to a fundamental feature of our modern society that we rarely consider. It is a system of systems, and each system is profoundly dependent on the others. This is the principle of cascading failure. The power grid relies on fuel supply chains to run its generators, and those supply chains rely on communication networks and transportation systems to function. Our communication networks, in turn, are completely reliant on a steady supply of electricity from the power grid. Our financial markets are nothing more than digital information, and they cease to exist without power and communication. Our emergency services rely on all of the above to coordinate and respond. Our civilization is not a robust pyramid, but a delicate house of cards. The sudden and simultaneous loss of the sun and the subsequent failure of the power grid is not a single problem to be solved. It is a single point of failure that triggers a domino effect, a cascading and instantaneous collapse of all of our societal infrastructure at once. Alongside this systemic collapse, a deeper psychological collapse would begin to take hold. Human beings are resilient. We can face known threats with courage and ingenuity. We have frameworks for understanding and responding to hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. But the disappearance of the sun is a context-free catastrophe. It is an event that has no precedent in all of human history or mythology, an event that violates the most basic laws of reality as we know it. This would trigger a mass cognitive breakdown, a state where the human brain simply cannot process the incoming information. In this vacuum of understanding, the mind would desperately seek any explanation, no matter how irrational. Rumors of secret weapons, of divine intervention, of alien attack would spread as quickly as fear itself, passed by word of mouth in the darkness. Furthermore, as the hours wear on, another fundamental pillar of our sanity would begin to dissolve: our sense of time. Without the sun to mark the passage of the day, and without our phones and digital clocks to give us an artificial measure, the rhythmic pulse of our society, the morning rush hour, the midday lunch break, the slow winding down of the evening would vanish completely. We would be cast adrift in a timeless, shapeless darkness, a profound disorientation of the mind that would only amplify the growing feelings of fear and isolation. We build our towers of glass and steel, reaching for the sky. We weave our intricate webs of digital information, connecting every corner of the globe, and we create our complex systems of governance and trade, all in the belief that we have achieved a kind of mastery over our world. But this entire grand and fragile enterprise, this thing we call civilization, all rests on the quiet, predictable, and utterly unappreciated rising of a single star. This event reveals that our civilization is not a mighty fortress built to withstand the ages. It is a delicate greenhouse, its transparent walls and ceiling built to let the light in, and in this moment, those walls have been shattered by a single, silent stone thrown from the heart of the cosmos. Trapped in the ruins of their collapsing world, people would turn their eyes upward, past the now silent airplanes and the dead satellites in their orbits, to a sky that has become both a source of profound terror and an object of wondrous, terrifying clarity. We live our lives at the bottom of an invisible ocean, a vast and turbulent sea of air that shelters us from the harshness of space, gives us the very breath of life, and carries the sounds and scents of our world. We move through this atmosphere as fish move through water, largely unaware of its presence, its currents, and its profound connection to the star that warms it. Now, as the world falls deeper into its cosmic night, we must watch as that ocean of air begins to change in strange and fundamental ways. The air itself begins to feel different in the lungs. It becomes sharp, crisp, and strangely thin to the nostril, a quality of cold that speaks not of winter, but of absence. As the ground radiates its heat away into the void, the layer of air just above it cools rapidly, becoming denser and heavier than the air in the layers above. This creates a powerful temperature inversion on a global scale, a lid of cold, heavy air that smothers the planet's surface and brings an end to the churning of the atmosphere. There is no wind, no breeze, not even the slightest stir of air, just a profound and heavy stillness that blankets everything. And in this stillness, a delicate and silent transformation begins. Frost, a lacework of intricate ice crystals, begins to form not just on window panes, but on every exposed surface. The blades of grass, the leaves on the trees, the dark soil of the fields, the cold steel of a forgotten car, all of it begins to be draped in a silent, glistening shroud of ice, as the last remaining moisture in the air crystallizes in the deepening cold. This eerie global calm is the direct result of the planet's thermodynamic engine shutting down. The weather that we experience every day, from the gentlest sea breeze to the most violent hurricane, is driven by the simple fact that the sun does not heat the earth evenly. It warms the equator more than the poles, and it warms the land more quickly than the oceans. This differential heating creates differences in air temperature, which in turn creates differences in air pressure. And the wind is nothing more than the atmosphere's eternal attempt to balance these pressures, to move air from high-pressure, cooler regions to low-pressure, warmer regions. This constant motion, called convection, is the engine of our weather. When the sun disappears, this differential heating stops. The engine seizes. The atmosphere, instead of churning and mixing, begins to stratify and settle. The colder, denser air pooling at the bottom, leading to the profound and unnatural calm that now grips the world. The frost that paints this still world white is also a product of this extreme cold. It is not merely frozen dew. In the process known as deposition, the water vapor still held in the cooling air, which is a gas, transitions directly into a solid-state ice without ever passing through the liquid phase of water. It is a quiet, delicate, and beautiful chemical magic, weaving crystalline feathers of ice across the entire face of the planet. Scientists who have modeled this unthinkable scenario have made projections about how quickly our world would lose its warmth. In a prolonged absence of the sun, they estimate that the average global surface temperature would fall below 0 degrees Celsius, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, within about a week. But in the compressed timeline of our 24-hour journey, the initial drop is far more dramatic and terrifying. Within just a few hours, the vast continental interiors, the temperate zones where most of humanity lives, would already be at or below the freezing point of water. By the end of this single, impossibly long day, the global average temperature could plausibly plummet to -20 or even -30 degrees Celsius. It is a fall so rapid and so steep that the very concept of adaptation becomes meaningless. Life, which has evolved over eons to the gentle rhythms of seasonal change, would be confronted with a plunge into deep winter conditions in the span of a single afternoon. We speak of the weather as if it is a moody, unpredictable entity, a character in the story of our lives that brings us sunny days or stormy ones. But in truth, it is a direct and physical conversation between the sun and the earth. The sun poses a question with its constant, radiant heat, and the atmosphere answers with wind and clouds, with rain and snow. In this scenario, the sun has fallen silent. The question is no longer being asked, and all that is left is the atmosphere's final, fading reply. A profound, echoing stillness, and the slow, inexorable descent into a universal and crystalline cold. While the land and the air surrender to this chill with frightening speed, the planet's great blue heart, the ocean, begins to stir, fighting back against the encroaching cold with its immense and hidden warmth. How deep does the memory of the sun go? To find the answer, we must turn our gaze away from the cold and indifferent stars and look not to the sky, but to the sea. While the continents are being draped in a shroud of frost, a strange and dramatic spectacle is unfolding on the world's oceans. The surface of the sea begins to steam, not with heat, but with cold. A thick, eerie and ghostly fog forms wherever the frigid air touches the relatively warm surface of the water, a phenomenon known as sea smoke. The waves, which are children of the wind, and the wind is a child of the sun, are no longer being driven into a frenzy. In the great stillness of the atmosphere, they become slow, heavy, glassy swells, the ocean's own deep pulse becoming quiet and calm. The great bodies of water that cover more than 70% of our planet are now a vast, dark, and brooding presence. They have become the planet's last bastion of warmth, a colossal heat battery that is now slowly discharging the stored sunlight of countless thousands of summer days into the freezing air. The ocean is breathing the memory of the sun back into the sky. This incredible resilience comes from a simple but powerful property of water. It has one of the highest specific heat capacities of any common substance found in nature. This is a technical way of saying that water is thermally stubborn. It takes a great deal of energy to raise its temperature by even 1 degree, and conversely, it must lose a tremendous amount of energy to cool down by that same degree. An ocean is, in essence, a massive thermal reservoir, a liquid savings account of heat. While the land temperature plummets by tens of degrees in a matter of hours, the surface temperature of the deep oceans will drop by only a few degrees in the entire first 24 hours. This thermal inertia is the planet's single greatest defense against the cosmic cold. The ocean is not just a body of water. It is a global climate stabilizer, and its memory of warmth is deep and long. This memory has a physical structure, for the ocean is not a uniform basin of water but is stratified into distinct layers. The top layer, stretching down a few hundred meters, is called the mixed layer, and it is the part that is warmed by the sun and churned by the wind. Below that lies a transition zone called the thermocline, where the temperature drops rapidly with depth, and below the thermocline is the vast, dark, and utterly stable deep ocean, which makes up most of the ocean's volume. Down here, the water is always cold, remaining at a steady temperature of just a few degrees above freezing, all year round, for centuries. The disappearance of the sun only affects the top mixed layer directly. The immense volume of the deep ocean, with its quiet, cold stability, remains entirely untouched and unaware. Furthermore, the ocean's heat is not static. A network of great ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic, forms a kind of global conveyor belt, constantly transporting warm water from the equator towards the poles. While the atmospheric engine of the weather has stopped, this vast and heavy oceanic engine has immense momentum. For a time, it would continue to circulate, its slow, powerful currents bringing warmer water from the tropics and the depths to the surface, further slowing the cooling of the sea. We are terrestrial creatures, beings of the land, and we often forget that we live on a water world. We see the oceans as vast and empty spaces between the places that truly matter. But in this moment of ultimate crisis, the ocean reveals itself as the planet's true heart. It is the world's memory, its great stabilizer, its final defense. It holds the warmth of 1,000 forgotten summers in its dark and silent depths. In the face of this ultimate night, the ocean reminds us that our world has a resilience and a depth that we who live on the surface can barely comprehend. It is a slow, powerful, and steady heartbeat in the chest of a world that is otherwise freezing into a silent sleep. Yet, even the ocean's memory is finite, and far beneath its resilient, steaming surface, in the crushing dark of the eternal abyss, there is life that has never known the sun at all. What does this long night mean to them? We believe, in the deepest parts of our being, that all life begins with the sun. It is the axiom upon which our understanding of the world is built, the first and most fundamental truth of our biology. But what if, in the most hostile, most alien, and most unreachable places on our own planet, life found another way to light its fire? To find this secret, we must take a journey downwards, far from the dying world of the surface. We descend through the cold, black waters of the ocean, 1,000 meters, then 2, then 3. The pressure here is immense, a crushing weight that would destroy any vessel not specifically built to withstand it, and the darkness is as absolute as the space between the stars. The water is only a few degrees above freezing. This is a realm of eternal night, a world that has never, in 4.5 billion years, been touched by a single photon from the sun. But in this seemingly dead abyss, there are oases of impossible life. We approach a great plume of what looks like black smoke, billowing from a chimney-like structure on the seafloor. This is a hydrothermal vent, a fissure in the Earth's crust, where superheated, mineral-rich water from deep within the planet erupts into the cold sea. And clustered around these vents, thriving in the toxic brew, is an ecosystem more alien than anything we could have imagined. Great forests of giant tube worms, some several feet long, stand anchored to the rock, their brilliant red plumes filtering the water. Pale, sightless crabs scuttle over the terrain, and dense fields of mussels and clams carpet the ground, their shells containing not the familiar flesh of their surface cousins, but strange, symbiotic bacteria. For these creatures, the sun has never existed. Its sudden disappearance from the sky above is an event of no consequence, a distant rumor from a world they will never know. Their world is unchanged. The miracle that powers this hidden biosphere is not photosynthesis, but a process that mirrors it in its elegance, called chemosynthesis. While the plants of the surface world harness the energy of light, the primary producers here, the foundation of this entire food web, are bacteria that have evolved to harness the energy of chemicals. They thrive on the compounds spewing from the Earth's interior, particularly hydrogen sulfide, a substance that smells of rotten eggs and is lethally toxic to most other forms of life. These remarkable bacteria absorb the hydrogen sulfide and use its chemical energy to do the same great work as plants. They create organic matter, building sugars from simple molecules. They are the farmers of the abyss, cultivating life from the planet's own internal geothermal heat. They have built a food web entirely independent of the sun, a shadow biosphere that runs on a completely different power source. The animals that live here either consume these bacteria directly or have formed symbiotic relationships with them, housing the bacteria within their own bodies in exchange for a constant supply of food. The organisms that thrive in these seemingly hellish conditions are known collectively as extremophiles, which translates simply to lovers of extreme environments. And their love is a testament to the sheer tenacity of life. They can withstand pressures that are hundreds of times greater than at the surface, temperatures that can range from near freezing to well over 100 degrees Celsius near the vent openings, and they flourish in a chemical bath that would poison nearly anything else. Their existence is not just a biological curiosity. It has profoundly reshaped our understanding of where life might be possible. It suggests that the habitable zone around a star, the narrow band where liquid water can exist on a planet's surface, might not be the only place to look for life in the cosmos. Life could potentially exist on rogue planets wandering the dark of interstellar space, or on the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, like Europa and Enceladus, which are thought to have liquid water oceans beneath their frozen shells, possibly warmed by tidal forces and hosting their own hydrothermal vents. The existence of chemosynthesis shows that life is not necessarily a miracle of sunlight, but a tenacious and opportunistic chemical process that will exploit any available source of energy, no matter how strange or hostile the environment. In our darkest hour, as the life we have always known is freezing on the surface, the planet reveals a secret and profound hope. Life, it turns out, has more than one trick up its sleeve. The sacred fire of existence is not a single solar-powered flame that can be easily extinguished, but a diverse and resilient collection of sparks, some of which burn brightly and defiantly in the most profound and crushing darkness imaginable. Perhaps life is not a fragile accident of our particular world, but a fundamental and stubborn property of the cosmos itself. But for us, the creatures of the surface, this deep-sea resilience offers little more than a philosophical comfort. Our world of sight and sound is dissolving around us, and as the hours tick by in the unending dark, another of our primary senses begins to notice a profound and unsettling change. The world is falling silent. Have you ever walked outside after a fresh, heavy snowfall and noticed the quiet? The familiar sounds of the world seem to be muffled and absorbed, and a deep, peaceful hush descends upon the landscape. Now, imagine that profound silence, not as a gentle blanket of snow, but as a permanent and universal state, blanketing the entire frozen planet. The most obvious sounds of the world are already gone. There is no bird song, no distant hum of traffic on a highway, no drone of an airplane passing overhead. But this new silence is deeper and more fundamental than just the absence of noise. The very air itself, now bitterly cold and still, seems to swallow sound, to rob it of its energy and its reach. A shout, which would once have carried for hundreds of feet, now travels only a short distance before it is muffled and absorbed into the stillness. The crisp crackle of a breaking twig underfoot would sound dull and flat, its sharpness stolen by the frigid atmosphere. The world is slowly transforming into a vast, anechoic chamber, a space designed to eliminate all echoes and reverberations, isolating every individual, every small group of survivors, in their own small and silent bubble of existence. This change in the soundscape is a direct consequence of the changing physics of the air. Sound is not a thing in itself, but a wave of vibrations, a ripple of pressure traveling through a medium like air, water, or solid ground. The speed and the distance that this wave can travel depend on the properties of the medium, particularly its temperature and its density. Cold air is significantly denser than warm air. Its molecules are packed more closely together, and this density actually causes the sound waves to travel more slowly. But more importantly for our sensory experience, the molecular motion in this frigid air is sluggish. As the sound wave tries to propagate, its energy is more effectively dampened and converted into tiny amounts of heat by these sluggish molecules. This process is called attenuation, and in the deep and stable cold that now grips the planet, the attenuation of sound would be dramatically increased. The world's ability to carry a voice, a call for help, or a simple greeting would be profoundly diminished. While the physics of the air changes, the psychology of our minds would begin to fray. Human beings, who evolved on a vibrant and noisy planet, are not well adapted to total and complete silence. Our brains are prediction machines, constantly processing a background hum of auditory information to build a map of our surroundings and to feel a sense of safety. When that constant stream of input is removed, our minds can begin to play tricks on us. In the absence of external sound, some people may begin to experience auditory hallucinations, hearing faint whispers or music that are not really there, as the brain tries to create the input it is missing. For others, the deep, planetary silence would be psychologically oppressive, a crushing weight that amplifies feelings of isolation, loneliness, and fear. With no ambient sound to mask them, the internal sounds of our own bodies, the steady, rhythmic thump of our own heartbeat, the soft, moist sound of our own breathing, would become unnervingly loud, a constant and inescapable reminder of our own fragile existence in a world that has gone quiet. Furthermore, much of our intuitive perception of space and distance is built upon the existence of echoes and reverberations. The way a sound bounces off a building, a line of trees, or the wall of a canyon gives us a sense of the scale and shape of our environment. But in a world that is now coated in a thick, porous layer of frost, these echoes would be significantly reduced. Surfaces that once reflected sound would now be covered in a sound-absorbing blanket of ice crystals. This would create a sonically flat and disorienting environment, further alienating us from our once familiar surroundings, making the world feel small, close, and claustrophobic. We think of our world primarily through our eyes, a landscape of shapes and colors and light. But in its absence, we come to realize how much we experience it with all of our senses. The changing soundscape reveals a deeper and more melancholy truth. The planet is not just getting dark and cold. It is losing its vibrancy, its resonance. It is as if the world itself is losing its voice, whispering itself into a frozen and final sleep. With our senses of sight and hearing so profoundly diminished, we might be tempted to turn our gaze inward, to retreat into the landscape of the mind, but the sky above offers a spectacle of such terrifying and magnificent beauty that it commands our full and undivided attention. In the deepest darkness, when our senses of the terrestrial world have been muted and all familiar light has been extinguished, our eyes, now fully adapted to the gloom, begin to see a new and terrifying kind of light. We turn our gaze upwards, and the sky is not the sky we have ever known. It is as if a veil has been torn away, revealing the true and brilliant machinery of the cosmos that has been hiding in plain sight all our lives. The Milky Way, which from our cities often appears as a faint, almost imperceptible milky band, is now revealed as a brilliant, textured, and overwhelmingly vast river of light. It is not a uniform glow but a complex tapestry, woven with the dark, intricate dust lanes that obscure its core and punctuated by the soft, ethereal glow of distant nebulae where new stars are being born. The planets Jupiter and Saturn, no longer competing with the ambient light of a sun-drenched sky, shine with the steady, piercing brilliance of aircraft landing lights, their subtle colors of cream and pale yellow now clearly visible to the naked eye. And across this shockingly clear starfield, the heavens become alive with motion. Meteors, the tiny grains of dust burning up in our atmosphere that are usually a rare and celebrated sight, now streak across the sky every few minutes, silent, fleeting scratches of light against the profound black. The universe, which for most of our lives is a distant academic concept, is now a visceral, immediate, and overwhelming presence, a ceiling of impossible beauty and terrifying scale that has been lowered to just above our heads. This breathtaking spectacle is made possible by the removal of two great obscuring veils. The first, and most obvious, is the blue sky itself. The sun is the ultimate source of light pollution. Its powerful rays scatter off the molecules in our atmosphere, creating the bright, uniform glow that washes out the fainter light of the stars. With the sun gone, this natural light pollution vanishes, and the sky returns to the perfect, transparent black of deep space. The second, more subtle veil is the turbulence of the atmosphere itself. The constant rising of warm air and sinking of cool air, the churning that creates our weather, also distorts the starlight passing through it. This is what causes the stars to twinkle. But in the profound stillness of the now stratified and freezing air, this turbulence has ceased. The stars no longer twinkle. They shine with a hard, unwavering and needle-sharp intensity, like diamonds laid carefully upon black velvet. We would also notice the absence of two other faint celestial phenomena, the zodiacal light and the Gegenschein. These are faint, ghostly glows in the night sky, caused by sunlight scattering off a vast, thin cloud of interplanetary dust that orbits the sun in the same plane as the planets. With their source of illumination gone, they too would vanish, making the blackness of the space between the stars even more absolute and profound. The absence of the sun would also fundamentally change our relationship with our planetary neighbours. We are used to seeing the planets as wandering stars, sometimes bright, but always as objects within the context of our own sky. In this absolute darkness, their true nature as worlds reflecting a distant light source would be laid bare. Venus, being a planet that orbits closer to the sun than we do, would have vanished along with the sun itself, as it is always seen in the same region of the sky. But the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, would become fixtures of an almost spiritual significance. Their apparent magnitude, their brightness as seen from Earth, would be astonishing, and their colours, the pale red of Mars, the creamy bands of Jupiter, the soft yellow of Saturn would be undeniable, a splash of subtle colour in a monochrome universe of white stars and black space. For the first time, humanity would see the solar system not as a diagram in a book, but as a real place, with our sibling worlds shining as beacons in the unending night. For all of human history, from the ancient astronomers of Babylon to the modern scientists with their great telescopes, we have looked at the heavens through a distorting veil. This event, in all its profound terror, gives us a single, horrifyingly beautiful gift, a true and unvarnished sense of our place in the cosmos. We are not the centre of a familiar world. We are the inhabitants of a tiny, fragile, and now freezing outpost, adrift in an ocean of stars of unimaginable scale, age, and grandeur. The intimate terror of our immediate situation, the cold and the dark and the fear, is for a moment eclipsed by a feeling of sheer, unadulterated awe at the sheer majesty of the view. This cosmic spectacle, however, is a cold comfort. As our world continues its plunge into a deeper and more crystalline freeze, another fundamental element of our planet begins to undergo a frightening and noisy transformation. The water. Listen. In the profound and unnatural silence of the frozen world, a new sound begins to emerge. It is not a single noise, but a soundscape of a million simultaneous cracks, groans, and deep, resonant booms that echo across the landscape. It is the sound of a world freezing over, the chorus of every lake, river, and pond as its surface finally surrenders to the cold and encases itself in a thickening skin of ice. The process begins in the shallowest of waters, where a thin, transparent sheet of ice forms on the surface, quickly growing opaque and white as it thickens. The great rivers, which still flow from the sheer momentum of their massive weight, begin to become choked with these floating sheets of ice, which collide and grind against each other, forming vast and impassable dams. Along the shores of the oceans, in the protected bays and shallow coastal waters, sea ice begins to form with a speed that has never been witnessed, its growth measured not in weeks or days, but in hours. The entire planet is being slowly and inexorably wrapped in a crystalline shell. And as this happens, the vast temperature difference between the still liquid water and the frigid air creates a constant, thick fog, shrouding these new, expanding ice fields in a ghostly and impenetrable mist. This process of a world encasing itself in ice reveals one of the most remarkable and life-sustaining chemical quirks in the known universe. For almost every other substance that we know of, the solid form is denser than the liquid form. A piece of solid iron will sink in molten iron. A piece of solid wax will sink in liquid wax. But water is a profound and beautiful exception. Solid water, which we call ice, is actually less dense than liquid water. This extraordinary anomaly is due to the nature of the hydrogen bonds that form between water molecules. Those tiny structures made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. In liquid water, the molecules are jumbled together, able to slip and slide past one another. But as they freeze, the hydrogen bonds arrange them into a highly ordered, rigid, and open lattice structure, a bit like crystalline scaffolding. This structure takes up more space than the jumbled arrangement of the liquid state, and because the same amount of matter now occupies a larger volume, its density is lower. This is the simple and profound reason that ice floats. If ice were denser than water, it would sink as it formed. Lakes, rivers, and even the oceans would freeze from the bottom up, eventually becoming solid blocks of ice, and the existence of complex aquatic life as we know it would be utterly impossible. This floating layer of ice is not just a curiosity, it is a shield. It forms an insulating blanket that protects the vast volume of liquid water beneath it from the much colder and more hostile air above. This is a crucial survival mechanism for countless ecosystems on our planet. While the surface of a deep lake might become a thick and impassable sheet of ice, the water at the bottom will remain liquid, stabilizing at a temperature of approximately 4 degrees Celsius, which is the point where liquid water is at its most dense. In these dark, cold, but still liquid refuges, countless species of fish, amphibians, and invertebrates could potentially survive the long night, shielded from the worst of the cosmic winter by this strange and wonderful property of water. Furthermore, the very act of freezing provides another subtle defense. It takes a surprisingly large amount of energy to turn liquid water into solid ice, and conversely, a large amount of energy, or latent heat, must be removed from the water for it to freeze. This property, known to physicists as the enthalpy of fusion, means that freezing the world's oceans is an incredibly slow and energy-intensive process. The very act of forming ice releases this latent heat into the environment, which ever so slightly slows down the overall cooling of the planet. Water, the simple and ubiquitous substance that gives us life, has this series of built-in chemical quirks that seem almost miraculously designed to protect that very same life. The fact that its solid form floats, creating an insulating shield under which liquid water can persist, is arguably one of the most important and fortunate accidents in planetary science. Our new world of ice is a terrifying and alien sight, a landscape of stark, white desolation. But beneath that crystalline blanket, in the dark and silent depths, a remnant of the old world huddles and waits, saved by a subtle and elegant law of chemistry. This chemical salvation, however, has its limits. The temperature is not stabilizing, it is still falling. And as the hours wear on and the cold deepens beyond anything our world has ever experienced, we approach a terrifying new threshold, a point where the very air that we breathe is threatened. We have lost the light that guided us and the warmth that nurtured us. We are watching the familiar water of our world lock itself away into a solid, crystalline prison of ice. What if, in the final act of this planetary tragedy, we were to lose the air itself? As the hours of this impossible night wear on and the temperature continues its relentless downward plunge, we approach a threshold of cold so profound that it is almost beyond our imagining. Sometime in the 20th hour, in the coldest and most remote parts of the world, places like the high, dry plateau of Antarctica or the vast frozen plains of the high Arctic, a strange and unsettling new precipitation begins to fall. It is not snow, for the air is now far too cold and dry to support the formation of snowflakes. It is a shimmering, ethereal mist that drifts down from the black sky, a substance so cold that it vanishes in a soft hiss the moment it touches the slightly less cold ice of the ground. Soon, though, as the ground chills even further, this mist begins to pool, forming tiny, glistening puddles in the hollows of the ice, puddles that shimmer and boil violently despite the unimaginable cold. This is liquid air. The sky is literally beginning to rain, and the very substance of our atmosphere, the gaseous ocean we have breathed for all our lives, is beginning to condense and fall to the ground. This terrifying phenomenon is governed by the same simple laws of physics that cause water to turn to steam in a kettle or to ice in a freezer. Every substance in the universe has a specific temperature at which it changes its state from a gas to a liquid to a solid. We are intimately familiar with the boiling and freezing points of water, 100 degrees and 0 degrees Celsius, respectively. The gases that make up our atmosphere also have these points, but they are so extremely low that they are irrelevant to our daily lives. Our atmosphere is composed of roughly 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, with small traces of other gases. Nitrogen, the most abundant component, has a boiling point, or more accurately a condensation point, of minus 196 degrees Celsius, which is minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. As the surface temperature in the coldest parts of the Earth, no longer warmed by the sun and having radiated away their heat for nearly a full day, approaches this almost unimaginable temperature, the nitrogen gas in the lowest layers of the atmosphere would begin to transform into a liquid. This would not be a slow or gentle process. It would trigger a catastrophic and runaway feedback loop, a full atmospheric collapse. As the first drops of liquid nitrogen form and rain out of the sky, the volume of gas in the atmosphere would decrease, causing the atmospheric pressure at the surface to drop. This lower pressure would, in turn, make it even easier for the remaining atmosphere to cool down and condense, which would cause the pressure to drop even further, accelerating the process in a vicious cycle. It would be a cascade of condensation, the sky literally thinning out as its primary component rains away. Oxygen, with its slightly higher boiling point of minus 183 degrees Celsius, would soon follow, condensing out of the thinning air and joining the nitrogen rain. The sky, our great and life-giving ocean of air, would be falling to the ground as a cryogenic liquid, leaving something akin to a vacuum in its place. This is the point where survival is no longer a question of resilience or adaptation, but a matter of pure, unforgiving physics, and the odds have fallen to zero. We are air-breathing creatures, our very biology and chemistry defined by the gaseous ocean we inhabit. To witness that ocean collapsing upon itself, to watch the sky fall and turn into a liquid that would flash freeze any living thing it touched, is to witness the end of the very definition of our world. The Earth is becoming a truly alien planet before our very eyes, its surface conditions no longer compatible in any way with the life it once so carefully and beautifully nurtured. In these final, freezing hours of the long night, with the end not just probable but physically and absolutely inevitable, what becomes of the human mind? What remains when all hope, and even the air itself, is gone? When there is no future left to imagine, when every possible path forward leads only to the same cold and silent end, the only place left for the human mind to travel is into the past. In the crushing dark and the life-extinguishing cold, huddled together in the failing remnants of their shelters, the people of the world are no longer panicking. The frantic energy of fear has long since been exhausted, replaced by a profound, quiet, and deeply human resignation. And in this shared and silent quiet, the mind, that relentless engine of consciousness, turns inward. People begin to tell stories. They do not speak of what is to come, for there is nothing to say. Instead, they share memories. They speak of the sun. They struggle to describe to each other, and to themselves, the simple, forgotten sensations of a world that no longer exists. They describe the feeling of warm sunlight on their skin on a summer afternoon, the almost painful brightness of light reflecting off the sea, the way a forest floor is dappled with moving patches of gold. They recall the taste of a sun-ripened strawberry, the scent of rain on hot asphalt, the sight of a perfect, cloudless blue sky. They whisper the lyrics of old songs. They recite the lines of half-remembered poems. They describe paintings they once saw in museums. Art, music, stories, memories, the intangible archives of human feeling become the only currency that still holds any value. Psychologists have a concept called terror management theory, which suggests that much of what we call human culture, our art, our religions, our desire to build legacies and have children is at its core a sophisticated and often unconscious defense mechanism against the terrifying knowledge of our own mortality. We create things that we hope will outlast us. We subscribe to belief systems that promise a life beyond this one, all in an effort to give our fleeting lives a sense of permanence and meaning in an indifferent universe. In the face of a collective and absolutely certain death, these drives would no longer be unconscious. They would become the only conscious act left to perform. Sharing a memory is no longer a simple act of conversation. It is a final, desperate act of preservation, a way of saying to the void, I was here. We were here. We saw and felt and loved this world, and we will not let it vanish into the cold without a final witness. This unimaginable scenario also forces us to confront a deep philosophical question about the nature of our own consciousness. The human mind is, in many ways, a machine for predicting the future. It is constantly projecting, planning, worrying, and anticipating what is to come. With that function rendered completely meaningless, what does consciousness become? Perhaps it would shift into a state of pure being, a heightened and almost meditative awareness of the present moment, a final flicker of existence, combined with a vivid and total recall of the past. Time itself, which had dissolved into a shapeless darkness earlier in the day, would now feel both infinitely slow and terrifyingly finite. The last act of the human race, the final expression of its strange and beautiful consciousness, would be to tell itself a story about its own ending. In the absence of any rational or scientific explanation for their fate, people would construct new narratives, new myths, a final attempt to find some sliver of meaning in the face of the ultimate, meaningless absurdity. Perhaps the ultimate purpose of a complex, conscious mind is not simply to survive, to propagate its genes, and to master its environment. Perhaps its deepest function is to bear witness, to observe the universe not as a collection of physical laws and spinning rocks, but as a place of beauty, of sorrow, of warmth, and of love, and to store all of that experience as a memory. In its final moments, humanity becomes a living archive, a collection of 7 billion libraries of experience, the collected memories of a warm, blue, and sunlit world. It is a final, silent testament of what it was like to be alive, a story whispered into the encroaching and absolute cold. And just as humanity gives up on its own future, the planet itself is about to be cast away from the only anchor it has ever known, embarking on a new and terrifying journey into the void. For 4.5 billion years, our planet has danced in a perfect and predictable circle around its star, held in a graceful and life-sustaining embrace by an invisible force. It is a dance so ancient and so reliable that its rhythm is encoded in the very stone of our world and the DNA of every living thing. Now, the music has stopped, and the dance is over. It is the 24th hour since the sun vanished from its place in the heavens. Deep in the silent vacuum of space, the Earth, which has been hurtling along its familiar orbital path at a staggering speed of 107,000 kilometers per hour, finally reaches the point where the sun's gravitational echo, that lingering curvature in the fabric of space-time, fades to nothing. In that instant, the trajectory of our entire world changes. It no longer curves through space, forever falling towards a center that no longer exists. Instead, its immense momentum takes over completely. Its path becomes a perfectly straight line. The planet, with its frozen oceans, its collapsed atmosphere, and the last vestiges of its life, is now flying off into the void at a tangent to its old orbit. We have been unmoored from our celestial anchor. We have become a rogue planet. This momentous and terrifying change is a perfect illustration of one of the most fundamental laws of the universe, a principle first articulated by Isaac Newton. His first law of motion states that an object in motion will stay in motion, with the same speed and in the same direction, unless it is acted upon by an external force. For all of its long history, the Earth has been a body in motion, and the sun's immense gravity has been the constant external force that has acted upon it. It was a perpetual and gentle pull, constantly deflecting the Earth from a straight path and bending it into the stable, nearly circular orbit that gave us our seasons and our years. With that force suddenly and completely removed, there is nothing left to bend our path. The Earth simply continues along the straight line, It was traveling at the very instant the gravitational tether was cut. It is a journey into the vast, dark, and almost unimaginably empty expanse of interstellar space. Our new journey is one of profound and unending isolation. At our current speed, it would take us approximately 40,000 years just to travel the distance to the next nearest star, Proxima Centauri, though our trajectory is not aimed in that direction or any particular direction at all. We are simply moving through the galaxy, a dark, cold wanderer in the great emptiness between the stars. But we would not be making this journey alone. Our moon, which is locked deep within the Earth's own gravitational well, would not be left behind. It would continue to circle our dead, frozen world as we drift together into the interstellar dark, a silent, ghostly, and ever-faithful companion on an infinite journey to nowhere. The familiar constellations in our sky would, over the course of many thousands of years, slowly shift and distort as we move past them, the ancient patterns of our myths and legends dissolving as we leave our local stellar neighborhood behind. There is a finality to this moment that is even greater than the freezing of our world or the collapse of our atmosphere. Our planet is no longer our planet in the familiar context of the solar system. It has been fundamentally and irrevocably redefined. It is an orphan, cast out of its celestial home, its familial ties to the other planets severed forever. The very concept of a year, the grand and rhythmic cycle of the seasons that has governed all life and all of civilization for eons, is now just a distant memory, a story to be told about a time when our world had a sun. We are citizens of nowhere, our passports void, our only address the crushing, unending emptiness of the cosmos. And then, in this deepest moment of cosmic despair, just as our world is truly and finally lost in the dark, a light appears. Imagine you are there, in the deepest dark, in the final moments, facing the absolute and certain end of everything you have ever known. You look up at the brilliant, terrifying starfield one last time, a final act of witness, and in the empty space where the sun should be, the place that has been a hole in the heavens for a full day, a single familiar star begins to shine. It happens in an instant. Exactly 24 hours after it vanished, the sun reappears in space-time. But for us, on the surface of the wandering Earth, we do not know it yet. For 8 minutes and 20 seconds, our planet continues its lonely journey into the void, a rogue planet cast out into the interstellar night. Then, the very first photons from the returned star complete their long journey and strike the Earth. It does not begin as a sunrise, that gentle creeping of light from a horizon. It begins as a star of impossible brightness appearing in the heart of the black sky, a star that rapidly swells, not rising, but growing in place, from a piercing point of light to a brilliant, blinding disk. A new dawn, born not at the edge of the world, but in the very center of our vision. The 8-minute delay, which began our journey into darkness, now works in reverse. The impossible event of the sun's return has already happened, and its light is the announcement, the cosmic herald of a new reality. For any survivors on the side of the planet facing this impossible apparition, this would be a moment of blinding, incomprehensible revelation, a sight so far beyond the realm of possibility that it would feel like a hallucination, a final trick of a dying mind. But it is real, and traveling with that first light, at the very same speed, is the force of gravity. The invisible tether rehooks the Earth. The ripples in space-time once again radiate from the sun, and our planet, which has been flying straight, is once again caught in their curve. But we are not where we are supposed to be. In 24 hours of traveling at 107,000 kilometers per hour, we have journeyed millions of kilometers off our original course. We are no longer in our old, stable, nearly circular orbit. The re-established gravity does not pull us back into that familiar dance. It simply begins to pull us from where we now are. Our world begins to fall back toward the sun, its trajectory shifted from a straight line into a new and likely highly eccentric and unstable elliptical orbit. The return to normalcy will not be a smooth or gentle one. There is another immediate and ironic consequence of the sun's return. The Earth that this new light illuminates is a world of brilliant, almost perfect white. It is a planet covered in a blanket of pristine snow and smooth ice, materials which are highly reflective. This property is known as albedo, a measure of how much light a surface reflects. A dark surface like asphalt has a low albedo, absorbing most of the light that hits it, while fresh snow has one of the highest albedos found in nature, reflecting up to 90% of the light. Our new, white Earth would be a dazzling mirror. Most of the incoming sunlight, in these first few hours, would be reflected straight back out into space, which would ironically slow the initial process of warming. The Earth would be brilliantly, blindingly bright, but still dangerously cold. The light, a promise of warmth not yet delivered. What is this feeling that would grip a survivor in this moment? It is not pure joy, for the world is still a frozen tomb. It is a hope so fierce, so sudden, and so unbelievable that it is physically painful. It is the shock of a pardon being granted at the very moment of execution, a reversal of a cosmic sentence that had already been passed. The universe, which had seemed so cruel and so profoundly indifferent, has inexplicably reversed its judgment. But the world that this new, brilliant light shines upon is not the world we lost. It is a broken, frozen, and silent ghost of a planet, a pale and scarred memory of the vibrant blue marble it once was. The light is a promise of life, but the returning warmth that will follow it will be a violent and terrifying baptism. The great thaw is about to begin. We prayed for the warmth to return. In the depths of the cold and the dark, the return of the sun was the only salvation imaginable, a singular hope for a world on the brink of absolute death. We never considered what a world of solid ice would do when touched by the full, unfiltered fire of a star. The very first effect is not one of warmth, but one of sound. It begins as a low, planetary groan, the sound of 1 billion square kilometers of ice crust beginning to expand under the sudden influx of thermal energy. This groan is quickly followed by a sharp, deafening crack that echoes across entire continents, as the immense thermal shock hits the brittle ice sheets. And then, the wind begins. As the sun's powerful and direct energy hammers down upon the equatorial regions, it creates a massive and almost instantaneous temperature differential with the still frozen poles. This colossal energy imbalance unleashes storms of a violence that our world has never known. The atmosphere, which had been still for a day, explodes into motion. Winds far exceeding the speed of any hurricane in recorded history, true hypercanes with speeds of over 500 miles per hour, would begin to scour the surface of the planet. And the surface of the ocean, which was sealed under a protective layer of ice, would be flash-heated from above. The ice would shatter, and the liquid water beneath it would explode into vast clouds of steam, creating a thick, globe-spanning fog and unleashing torrential freezing rains that would batter the broken landscape. This cataclysmic rebirth is driven by a series of powerful physical principles. The first is thermal shock. You may have seen a frozen glass shatter when hot water is poured into it. Now, imagine that process on a planetary scale. The vast ice sheets, in some places miles thick, would have their surfaces heated with incredible speed by the returning sun. This top layer would try to expand, while the immense depths of the ice remained frozen, solid, and brittle. The stress from this differential expansion would be unimaginable, and it would shatter the ice sheets not in a gentle melt, but in a violent, explosive fragmentation. This would trigger icequakes that would register higher on the Richter scale than any tectonic earthquake in human history. Great sections of ice the size of countries would carve from the continents and crash into the sea, creating tsunamis of a scale that would wash over not just coastlines, but entire continental interiors. The atmospheric engine of our planet, which had seized up in the cold, would not just restart, it would restart with the force of a detonation. The extreme temperature gradients between the rapidly heating tropics and the still deeply frozen poles would create pressure differences far greater than anything our world is built to handle, and these pressure differences are what would fuel the planet-girdling hyperstorms. And as the ice on the surface is battered by this new, violent sunlight, much of it would not even have a chance to melt into water. In the still thin and cold air, it would sublimate, turning directly from a solid into a gas. This would pump immense, unprecedented quantities of water vapor into the atmosphere in a very short amount of time, fueling the megastorms even further and creating a period of extreme, chaotic, and globe-spanning weather that could last for decades, or even centuries, before the planet found a new and stable equilibrium. We thought that the absence of the sun was the apocalypse, the final and quiet end to our world. We were profoundly wrong. The return of the sun is the apocalypse. It is a terrifying and humbling reminder that the cosmic forces that nurture and sustain life operate on a scale of energy that is utterly indifferent to our survival. The very same radiant energy that gently coaxes a seed to sprout from the soil is the same energy that, when applied to a world of ice, can shatter continents and boil oceans. We are not being gently saved from the cold, we are being reborn in a global crucible of fire and flood, a violent and chaotic baptism that will scour the old world from the face of the planet. In the midst of this global chaos, as the world is being violently and unrecognizably remade, what of the life that managed to find a way to survive the long, cold night? After the fire of the returning sun, after the floods from the melting ice, after the shattering of the world by storms and quakes, there is a whisper of green. Years, perhaps decades, have passed since the day of the long night and the violent dawn that followed. The hyperstorms have exhausted their fury, calming into a new and unfamiliar pattern of weather. The planet is now permanently shrouded in a thick layer of clouds, trapping the sun's warmth and creating a new global climate that is much warmer, wetter, and more uniform than the one we once knew. The landscape itself is unrecognizable, a world of vast inland seas, scoured bedrock, and deep canyons carved by the meltwater floods. Most of the complex life that once graced the surface has been wiped out, a casualty of the freeze and the subsequent violent thaw. But then, in the fine, nutrient-rich silt left behind by a retreating flood, a single seed, which has lain dormant and frozen through the long crisis, finally feels the embrace of liquid water and a gentle warmth, and it awakens. A single, tiny, and impossibly fragile green shoot pushes its way up through the barren soil, reaching for a sun in a sky it has never known. This tiny shoot is the vanguard of a planetary recovery, a recovery made possible by the incredible resilience of life itself. Many plants on our world have evolved seeds that are, in essence, perfect time capsules, their precious genetic cargo protected by a tough outer shell. They can survive being frozen, being baked, being passed through the digestive systems of animals, and they can wait, sometimes for hundreds or even thousands of years, for the right conditions to return. The soil of the old world was a vast and living library of these seeds, a seed bank that held the memory of every forest, meadow, and grassland. While the parent plants were wiped out, this library of potential would have survived the 24-hour freeze. The return of liquid water and steady warmth would be the quiet, insistent signal for this library to open its doors, for its ancient stories to be told again upon the new, barren landscape. And the seeds would not be the only survivors. The true masters of survival, the extremophiles, would have weathered the crisis with little difficulty. The hardy bacteria and archaea, deep within the Earth's crust and soil, the microscopic tardigrades, or water bears, that can enter a state of suspended animation called cryptobiosis, surviving conditions of near absolute zero and the vacuum of space, and of course the entire untouched chemosynthetic ecosystem of the deep-sea vents, which never even registered that a crisis had occurred. These organisms, the planet's hardiest and most ancient inhabitants, would form the foundation of a new tree of life. They would be the first to begin processing the raw minerals of the new world, to begin creating the conditions for a more complex biosphere. This slow, patient process of recovery is known to ecologists as succession. It is the natural and predictable way that an ecosystem heals itself after a great disturbance. First come the pioneer species, the hardy lichens, mosses, and microbes that can survive on bare rock and barren soil. They are the world builders. They slowly break down the rock, they fix nitrogen from the air, and when they die, their bodies create the very first, thin layer of new soil. They stabilize the broken land and change the environment, paving the way for the first grasses and weeds to take root. These, in turn, create more soil and provide shelter, allowing for shrubs, and then, eventually, the first fast-growing trees to return. The rebirth of the planet's biosphere would be a process taking many thousands of years, a slow, patient, and inexorable reclamation project run by life itself. Life is more resilient than a planet. It is a principle, a tenacious chemical force that persists through cataclysm and chaos. That first, lonely green shoot is a promise. It is a quiet, defiant testament that even after a true apocalypse, the story is not over. The world is not dead. It was merely sleeping, and it is beginning to dream of forests and fields once more. For any human survivors who witness this new world, it would be both a second chance and a profound and humbling lesson. A lesson written in ice and fire about the star we once so carelessly took for granted. How would you look at a sunrise if you had once seen it disappear? How would you feel its warmth on your skin if you had once felt the beginnings of the cold that lies beyond it? Imagine the descendants of the survivors, living in a world remade, perhaps many generations after the time of the long night. They would inhabit a planet that is both familiar and profoundly alien. The geography of their world has been changed by the floods and the ice. The species of plants and animals that surround them are the hardy pioneers of a new biosphere, and the climate is a warm, humid, and cloudy new reality. But one thing remains the same. The sun, their sun, still rises every single morning. And for this new humanity, the sunrise would not be a mundane event, the simple turning of a page from one day to the next. It would be the most sacred and significant moment of their day. They would have new myths, new sciences, and new religions, but all of them would revolve around the star that left them and then, miraculously, returned. Every dawn would be a sacred event, a moment of collective and silent gratitude. Every ray of warmth would be a gift to be cherished. And the science of astronomy would be the highest and most vital of all pursuits, a constant, vigilant watch upon the heavens, not just out of curiosity, but out of a deep and instinctual need to ensure that the sky is keeping its promise. This profound cultural shift would be the inevitable result of a trauma seared into the collective memory of the human species. A global cataclysm of this magnitude, an event that touched every single person on Earth simultaneously and threatened the very definition of their world, would not be a story that could ever be forgotten. The tale of the long night would become the defining myth of this new humanity, a foundational narrative as powerful as any story of creation or deluge from our own past. It would shape their culture, their ethics, their art, and their social priorities for thousands of years, a constant reminder of their fragility and their dependence on the cosmos. Their science, too, would be driven by a very different set of priorities. Their new, eccentric orbit might create seasons of extreme and unpredictable intensity. Understanding the new rhythm of their world, predicting the climate, and charting the heavens would not be matters of academic curiosity. They would be the fundamental tools of survival. The primary goal of this new civilization would be the relentless search for stability and the deep understanding of their new, and perhaps more dangerous, planetary environment. This experience would also force a fundamental shift in human values. Our current civilization, in many ways, is built upon the assumption of endless resources and a stable environment, which has led us to value things like consumption, expansion, and relentless growth. A post-apocalyptic civilization, born from an event that showed them the true precarity of their existence, would likely value a very different set of ideals. They would prize resilience over growth, preservation over consumption, and a deep, systemic, and almost spiritual understanding of their planetary environment. They would learn, through the hardest lesson imaginable, that their world is not a resource to be exploited, but a fragile and precious lifeboat adrift in a vast and dangerous ocean. This event would force a kind of maturity upon our species, a necessary evolution from a planetary adolescence into a true and sober adulthood. The people of this new Earth would no longer be the thoughtless children who take the warmth of their home for granted. They would become its conscious caretakers, its vigilant guardians, humbled and enlightened by a cosmic lesson written in ice and fire and darkness. The silent covenant we once had with our star would be silent no longer. It would be a new covenant, a daily, conscious act of gratitude, of observation, and of vigilance. They would finally understand, in their very bones, a truth that we have always known but have never truly felt. That we are not the masters of this world. We are, and have always been, the humble and dependent subjects of the sun. And so, our long journey through the darkest day and the most violent dawn comes to an end, leaving us with one final, lingering thought as we return from this imagined future to our own quiet and peaceful present. In the end, after all the cosmic physics and planetary science, after all the imagined chaos and the quiet despair, what is the real difference between the light of a distant star and the spark of life that animates our own bodies? As our journey into the long night concludes, I invite you to bring your awareness back from that vast and speculative landscape to this present, simple moment. Come back to the quiet room where you are listening, to the gentle and steady rise and fall of your own breath, to the subtle warmth in your hands, and the slow, reliable beat of your own heart. The story we have just told is one of unimaginable cold and violent energy, a tale on a scale that dwarfs human comprehension. But at its heart, it is simply a story about what it means to be a warm, living thing in a universe that is, for the most part, profoundly cold and empty. In a way, our own bodies are their own small suns, constantly and quietly burning fuel to create the warmth, the motion, and the consciousness that is you. The process of metabolism that occurs in every one of your cells, at this very moment, is a form of slow, controlled, and beautiful combustion. We take in energy from the food we eat, energy that was first captured from the sun's light by the miraculous process of photosynthesis in plants. We then, in a very real sense, burn that energy in our cells to maintain our body temperature at a steady 37 degrees Celsius, to power the electrical signals of our thoughts, and to give us the strength to move through the world. Every living being on this planet that relies on the sun is a temporary and precious vessel for its ancient light, a small, walking flame that carries the star's energy forward through time. Our bodies are also in a constant, delicate, and lifelong battle to maintain a stable internal environment, a state known as homeostasis, against the indifference of the universe. The story of the planet's struggle to hold on to its heat in the face of the void is a grand metaphor for the struggle your own body wages every single second to maintain its own warmth and its own delicate chemical balance. It reminds us that stability, comfort, and life itself are not the default states of the universe. They are active, precious, and precarious achievements. Perhaps, then, this long journey into the darkness was ultimately a journey to better understand the light. It was an exercise in imagination designed to help us appreciate the mundane and overlooked miracle of a completely normal day. It was an attempt to feel the warmth of the sun not just as a pleasant sensation on our skin, but as a fundamental and inseparable part of our own existence. The most profound truth is that the sun is not just a separate object out there in the sky. Its energy is here, right now, inside of you. It is in the electrical spark of the firing neuron that is processing these very words, and it is in the chemical bonds of the molecules that make up your blood and your bones. We are, in the most literal and scientific sense, forged from starlight and powered by a sun. Our journey is over. The sun shines in the sky. The world is safe and warm. And perhaps, as you drift off into your own gentle darkness of sleep, a darkness that is not to be feared but to be welcomed, you can feel that quiet and beautiful connection. It is a silent covenant between the distant star that gives and the miraculous life that receives. It is a quiet understanding of the incredible, fragile, and immeasurable gift of an ordinary day. Thank you for joining me on this long journey through the longest night. I hope it has brought you some measure of peace, wonder, and perhaps a deeper appreciation for the light. If you have enjoyed our exploration, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment to share your thoughts. Your presence here makes this community a warmer place. I wish you a peaceful, restful sleep, filled with gentle dreams of a warm and sunlit world.